Thank you very much, Lucia. That's really helpful, just knowing what the setup's going to be, and please feel free to interrupt myself or any of us if we need to be doing or not doing something at any particular time. I am Director of European and International Development at the University of the Highlands and Islands. My name is Linda Stewart. I've been involved in the Northern Periphery and Arctic and the previous Northern Periphery programmes since their inception in the 1990s. And I've seen the programme grow to what it is today with so many really, really good and complementary projects. But what amazes me always that it's always maintained this sort of family feeling, that there's a real closeness amongst the people participating and genuine cooperation, which doesn't always happen in other programs, perhaps some of the larger programs that you might be involved in. So I was absolutely delighted to get the opportunity to join the conference today, and very happy to moderate this session and just try and keep everything on track. I'm particularly keen to be able to join this afternoon because we've seen some beautiful views of Oulu this morning. It's a beautiful place. I don't know how many of you have been there. I was there last year and I've been a few times in the past. And of course, it would be wonderful to be there in person and to be meeting up with all of you in person for a cup of coffee. But the reality is, as we all know, it's not always possible, whether due to travel costs or time constraints to attend all of these, whereas it's relatively easy just to click on Zoom and join a session like this. So I think, as no doubt will come out in some of the discussions, it's quite good to look at the benefits of how we're operating now, as well as some of the drawbacks. At this point, I was going to introduce Stefan Nystrom. I don't know, Stefan, I'm not seeing your name there. I don't think he's with us yet, is he? Okay.
No, unfortunately not.
Stefan was going to be our rapporteur for this session, so we'll need to just think about that and see what we do. Hopefully he might be able to join us throughout the course of the session. Stefan is a member of the NPA Managing Authority, and he would be taking the notes and taking them back to the session, which would allow the rest of us to focus on the presentations and the discussion. We now have 3 short presentations from excellent speakers here, exploring ways that transnational cooperation can help to achieve a much greener NPA, which is something I know is dear to all of our hearts. They bring expertise from 3 different areas: the energy sector, circular economy, and management of Natura sites, but they all show how cooperation within the NPA regions can advance greener solutions. I propose that we hear all 3 presentations, and then I'll ask for questions in the format that Lucia just outlined for us, and looking in particular at the next steps for a future NPA programme. Does that sound okay to everybody? Good, good. Our first speaker this afternoon is Nicholas Gubbins, who is Chief Exec of Community Energy Scotland. Not only joining from Scotland as I am, but we're also based in the same town of Inverness. One of Scotland's strengths is community engagement, which has really come to the fore over recent months of the pandemic. Nicholas is going to present a recent paper from Community Energy Scotland about next steps in community energy, mobilising the demand side, building stronger communities, and a just transition to a low-carbon energy system in the wake of COVID-19. Nicholas, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda, and thank you also for the opportunity to speak this afternoon and share a few thoughts with you. It's much appreciated. Community Energy Scotland is a registered Scottish charity, and our mission is to strengthen and empower local communities by helping them to own, control, and benefit from their local renewable energy resources, control and reduce their energy costs, and regenerate their communities and play their part in the low carbon transition. We've been involved in transnational projects for quite a while now, probably for over 20 years really, in total. And in fact, we were closely involved in the NPA project, Social Enterprises and Community Renewable Energy, which was about 8 years ago now, I think. We've currently got several transnational projects underway, funded and supported through Horizon 2020. And I'm sure, like many of us around Zoom today, for us, it is just a way of life, and the opportunity to share and learn from each other is fantastic. And I'm sure I'm not the only one in Scotland who is very concerned about the way the Brexit process is going and the implications that it might have. But it'll be down to us to make sure that we retain as much as possible the links that we've got. So I'm just really touching on two particular challenges which we've identified in our recent review of community energy, which Linda referred to. The first one is building community resilience to global shocks. And the second one is speeding up the transition to a low carbon energy system. So fundamentally, we believe that these two things should and do go hand in hand, and that strengthening the role of community-based organizations is crucial. So just taking the first one, building community resilience, we believe that COVID is really a wake-up call which has illustrated our dependency on long and weak supply chains. I'm sure you're equally aware how many other things it's also illustrated, but that's a significant factor. The lockdown and health crisis has highlighted the importance of local community organizations in helping people. We have been very lucky that widespread illness has not happened to the degree to where the UK energy system has been compromised. But that said, it's very important in our view to note that the resilience of the energy system underpins community resilience. So in relation to the energy system itself, we have seen that global demand reduction has had a massive impact on fossil fuel businesses. In an unexpected way, the much lower demand as a consequence of the lockdown in the UK created real electricity grid balancing challenges. On the other hand, there remains very high dependency on fossil fuels for heating and transport, especially in the remoter and peripheral parts of Scotland, and in particular the Highlands and Islands. The huge frustration to us is that these are the areas which typically have abundant renewable energy resources. And we also largely have the technology to be able to utilize these locally, but it's simply not happening to the degree or at the speed that we would like to see it happen. Decentralization of the UK energy system is slowly happening, and that's fundamentally what I'm talking about here, decentralization, but it needs to move much faster, and in a way which strengthens the ability to supply local energy needs through local renewable energy generation, replacing fossil fuels in transport and heating, in a way which retains the value of energy generation in the local economy, overcomes electricity grid constraints by enabling direct local supplies linked through smart grids to controllable heating and transport demand. That's the sort of the local demand mobilization picture. And then supports people to become much more energy aware and reduce their demand and adopt low carbon heating and transport options, which is by no means a given as things currently stand. So in Scotland, as Linda has already alluded to, we're lucky in that we have a very strong infrastructure of local community groups. But again, on the other hand, and I think our connection with our colleagues in other countries, especially in the northern countries of Europe, On the other hand, we do not have an equivalent local level of democracy, which exists in so many other Northern Periphery countries. We just have large unitary local authorities. We do have things called community councils, but they really have no significant democratic impact at all. So the local community group infrastructure has really evolved to some extent to fill this gap. Bearing in mind these points about resilience and decarbonisation, we believe it should be a priority to invest in these local anchor groups so that they can help drive a number of key measures which we now think are central to building both resilience and decarbonisation. That's local energy demand reduction through energy efficiency retrofit measures, especially in hard to heat properties. The widespread adoption of prosumption, that's where people are both generating and consuming power that they generate themselves. Domestic level generation, in other words, and use of energy, with local groups leading measures such as bulk procurement campaigns to get the price of installation of this kit, both in terms of the capital cost and installation cost down, and also measures such as peer-to-peer trading between households that are generating power, storing it, and able to share it with their neighbours. Other measures such as piloting and establishing local energy supply arrangements, which owing to the challenges of the regulatory framework in the UK, this is very difficult for us at the moment. And then finally, promoting and developing electric vehicle use, electric heating, energy storage and aggregation, but absolutely critically, trying to wean people off our hypermobility and the sense that you have to travel long distances to access any services. So in other words, a whole-scale localization of community life. And then finally, building the community capacity and ability to take these sorts of measures forward. So that's just a very quick canter through the sorts of context and measures that we believe now need to be taken forward, which both we think would help promote community resilience as well as speed up decarbonisation. So that's me, Linda.
Thank you. Perfect timing there, Nicholas. Thank you for setting the scene so well from a practical point of view, as well as the content there. I'm aware of a lot of the good work that you and your colleagues do in this area, but it's always refreshing just to get a bit more detail there. And isn't it always good to learn a new term? The new term I've learned this afternoon so far is prosumption. I understand the concept, but I didn't know there was a name for it. So that's good to hear. Thank you so much for that. And we'll come back to some of these points shortly. Our second speaker this afternoon is Dr. Neil James, who's a research fellow at the Environmental Research Institute at the University of the Highlands and Islands in Scotland. Neil is a colleague of mine, but he is based over 170 kilometres further north of where I am in Inverness, at the furthest point of mainland UK in Thurso. Neil's lead partner of the NPA project Circular Ocean and a partner of the Blue Circular Economy project, and both of these focus on reducing marine litter, in particularly discarded fishing nets and gears, by improving the conditions for a complete circular economy cycle, converting plastic wastes into new valuable production materials. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Linda. Yes, it's really a good opportunity to speak to everyone, and I know I've had the pleasure of working with a few of you in projects in the past or currently are. So it's just good to be. What Linda was saying about a kind of a family kind of feeling to the NPA area, and it really does feel like that. And although we can't be in Oulu this year, this is kind of the next best thing. I haven't been part of NPA or NPP projects since the 90s, like Linda, but I have been part of quite a few projects. So I'm now working on my 8th project. And these have covered really a wide range of topics, from renewable energy, like local renewable energy solutions, different types of renewable energy, so wood and different types of biomass. One project called Coast Adapt, which was looking at how communities can adapt to climate change, and what practical implementations they can put towards there. And some other projects as well, which I won't go into too much, but including Regina, which is about smart specialization strategies, and App4C, which was a very good project, which has just finished, looking at oil pollution in the NPA area, and both circular ocean and blue circular economy also looking at a type of pollution that's marine plastic litter, and that's both focused on the kind of circular economy angles there. So I'm going to give a kind of brief, a very kind of brief, kind of high level, what I think kind of works well in projects, and how we can kind of move forward and kind of focus our efforts, but in kind of very, you'll see what I mean in a kind of broad context. And although we can't be in Oulu, we can't be in Finland, which is a great shame, I am going to employ a little bit of Finnish wisdom into my talk as well. So when we think about these kind of projects, especially in kind of the kind of greener actions, more sustainability, often we're thinking about creating, leveraging, or implementing opportunities that either safeguard or improve the environment. So that's kind of how I'm kind of thinking of where we should go in the future. And I think from the projects that I've been working on, you can kind of sum up the impact and of the project in terms of its outcomes and what happens, but also the way in which that's achieved. And you can sum this up in 2 ways really, and that's to address kind of 2 questions. One is by, well, what is the project doing? So is it specialized in creating a novel supply chain for a certain type of renewable energy, for instance? Is it trying to reduce plastic? Is it trying to prepare communities for oil spills? So that's the kind of real focus. And I think projects do well when they are focused and really think about what are they doing and how does this help build a sustainable community, sustainable environment. And the other angle on this is how is a project achieving these aims? And so when we think about this, often we can get caught up in what the project is doing, but we really do need to have a bigger picture. So is the project looking at a single issue, or is it taking a more holistic approach? So is it doing a life cycle analysis or life cost analysis, and really looking at what's the impact of how we're achieving these project aims? So that's really something that we can kind of summarize. So what is it doing and kind of why, and actually how is it going about achieving these, and what's the impact of those? And so I think what we really want to do is we want to make great strides, but also tread lightly whilst doing so. We don't want to cause kind of knock-on consequences or have negative impacts whilst we are trying to solve or prevent an issue becoming more wider spread. And so I think Snufkin from Comet in Moominland would sum this up as, it would be awful if the world exploded. It is so wonderfully splendid. So when we go on to think about how we do this, how do we go about building projects, building in the future, how do we make the kind of greatest strides, how do we make the most successful projects? And every single project I've come back, all the best parts of the projects, or the best projects themselves, they've all have one thing in common, and that's that they've harnessed the most important and valuable resource, and that is people. People are fantastic, people are wonderful, they're intelligent, they're innovative, they're kind, they're generous, they're enthusiastic, and every single project, without doubt, whether it's the project as a whole, having the partners involved, so having the right people, the right partners with a range of expertise and the right enthusiasm, and the good work ethic, and the good way of thinking, and just being able to collaborate with people, that by far has been the #1 thing for a successful project. You can have certain institutions involved in a project, but actually it's the people that are involved. You can have an institution or that looks good on paper, but it really does come down to the people that you work with. And when we spread that out as well, it's not just the people that are in the project, but it's also the ones that you involve. So having that stakeholder engagement, but not just as a kind of tick box, actually really involving them, and finding out who really are the kind of gatekeepers to helping progress the project, and who really are the ones that are going to make the biggest difference. We've had that in Circular Ocean, where we had to do a lot of groundwork, talking to a lot of fishermen to really understand what happens to the fishing nets, how often they're used, We had to have meetings with over 100 of them, and we had some other engagement tools that were employed as well. So it really is doing this kind of hard work, one-on-one conversations with people, going, letting people tell you about the situation from their point of view. It really does help you get to the end point, a shared end point, much quicker and in a much more successful manner. And so it's, for some of the projects we've worked on, it's not about just connecting people, which is a fantastic thing as well, especially in some of the conferences we've run. It's about connecting people together and allowing them to talk about a common issue where they wouldn't necessarily have spoken to each other before. But it's also about connecting with people, and that's a key additive there. So in some of the ways that we've done this in the past, and just as an example for Circulation, we've had meetings and conferences, so one-on-one meetings with individual people along the kind of supply chain of marine litter, because it's a very, marine plastic litter is not a kind of typical supply chain in some sense, because it's lost, and then whose responsibility is it? Does it, and when it washes up on the beaches or when it's at the port authorities, it's quite a kind of complex issue. But so getting these conferences and meetings with individuals and one-on-one, really trying to understand issues and getting expertise in there and connecting with people, that's been a real success. We've also used specialized tools. So we had this thing called it's got two names, either a serious game or a scenario exploration system. And this is something we employed in Circulation. And it is a game that has a board with tokens, and you get people playing. But you can actually, it's a way of engaging people. And so we had people from, in this instance, a port authority gathered around, and there were port authority and local authority as fishermen, a local company that recycles. And it was a really good tool which allowed people to talk about an issue and plan for the future. And it does that under different kind of economic scenarios, different political scenarios. And, it's a really good tool. It's much harder to explain how to play the game than it is just to play the game. But it is a really good tool. And we tailored this. It was developed by the EU Joint Research Council, and we tailored it for the Circulation. So it was a really good tool. Another method we use is actually talking in people's language. I know it's a very kind of simple thing, but for the Circulation logo, we actually developed a logo that was in Greenlandic, because we knew that we would get much more people involved there with greater understanding. We wanted to be open and work with people there. We didn't want it to be something that we were imposing on people, and the opportunities or the involvement. So we spent a lot of time creating things in the local language, and that's a real key issue. And another way of involving people in our current project, Blue Circular Economy, we have a kind of citizen science or a crowdsourcing project. So we have Birds and Debris that allows, so it's birdsanddebris.com, allows people from all over the world to report instances where birds have been entangled in plastic litter, or where they have incorporated it into their nests. And we're gathering not just in the NPA area, all over the world. And we've had, I think it's over 80 species, different species of birds been entangled. And we've had over 40 different countries that have reported that. So it's another way of engaging people and to allow people, rather than feeling helpless, feeling that they can actually contribute to the problem. And so we're using this in some of the tools and reports that are coming up, and for our research, and to help inform our work that we're doing. And so change is inevitable, and we need to take people with us when we make these positive changes. And so, to quote Moomin Mama in Moomin Papa at Sea, but one needs a change sometimes. We take everything too much for granted, including each other. I think we can all maybe agree with that, especially in these times. And so how do we kind of lower the impact of these projects whilst we're doing this? And some of the things I'm talking about, engaging with people, having these meetings, having these conferences, these are things that really allow us to share these experiences across the NPA area. There are a lot of shared experiences that we have, and sometimes we connect more with each other in the NPA area than we do perhaps in our capital cities, for example. And it really is about engaging with people and changing in a positive way and improving, but not imposing. So you've really got to take people with you. But one of the things that I'm acutely aware of, and this, especially this year, is something which has highlighted that, is that our projects do have impacts on the environment. Not only in our time as well, when we're traveling to meetings or conferences, but there is an impact on the environment. And we are very dispersed. If we go and visit local communities, have meetings, that has a carbon impact. And all of this, we need to take into account and really think very carefully about what we do in the future and how we best best tackle this. So if we're tackling one issue, whether it's about circular economy or plastics, for example, marine plastics or oil, you know, are we causing another problem by increasing greenhouse gases by flying all over the place when we could have used another method, or we could have engaged with the community group and they could have done the thing that we were going to travel there for. And you know, and this sort of issue is prevalent in a lot of different projects. So in terms of renewable energy, if you're transporting wood from one source to another, if you're trying to get a better supply chain, but what's the impact on the transport of the resources? Are we taking that into account? You know, it's sometimes we do really have to look at the holistic kind of impacts. And again, when we think about the circular economy, and particularly the projects I've been part of, we've been very keen to stress that we look at the life cost analysis and life cycle analysis, because there are some instances where, you know, taking your plastic waste and transporting it all the way across Europe to where it gets recycled, actually that might have a higher carbon impact, carbon footprint than if you were just to incinerate it and make new plastic. That's not necessarily what everyone wants to hear, but we really have to be open and honest about these kind of challenges. And so one of the things one of my colleagues was also always stating is that a circular economy, we should strive to and make things go towards a more circular economy, but it shouldn't be at any cost. We really have to make sure that what we're doing does actually make the most sense for a more sustainable community and sustainable environment as well. So those are my thoughts. And just to end on another Moomin quote, the world is full of great and wonderful things for those who are ready for them. And I think the NPA area as a whole is always up for challenges to improve the environment, improve society, and I think we're probably ready for the challenge as well. So, thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Neil. Again, some really thought-provoking aspects there that you've been good enough to share with us. I particularly like looking more at the how we're doing things as well as the what. And I know in the past we've been very good at reporting on the what's been achieved, or even worse, if you like, constraining reporting to have I spent the money or have I not? Do I have the bus tickets, etc., etc., etc. That's important. Of course, you can't ignore it, but we should be putting a lot more emphasis on what we're achieving, the impacts, and the processes that we've used, particularly when it's worked well. And you've picked up key points on that. Our third speaker is Marta Rongved Dixon, who is a senior advisor in tourism, the section for natural resources, agriculture and tourism at Vestland County Council in Norway. She's going to present to us the ASCENT project, which designed practical solutions and trialled new initiatives and concepts for the protection and management of upland sites and natural areas. The project has proved to be extremely successful in transferring practical knowledge across partners and their communities. Its legacy is lasting and unlocked new investments. And just before we start, Marta, I'm pleased to welcome a few more people who have been able to join in. Good to have you with us, and you're joining us for the third of 3 presentations. Marta, over to you.
Linda, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me and the ASCENT project onto the conference. Like you said, the ASCENT project ran from May 2016 to September 2018 with funding from the NPA under the Access for Natural and Cultural Heritage program. And we were 5 partner countries with 7 natural sites who came together to find good solutions for vulnerable areas in mountains and uplands who were affected by an increased footfall, mainly caused by tourism. You will all have noticed, I'm sure, that this has become even more relevant with the COVID crisis and the way we've all been stuck at home and staycation, and it looks like everyone's been out walking. And in a lot of cases now, that happens in areas that aren't really developed for that kind of use, and that causes damage eventually. The 7 sites were in Northern Ireland, in Hossa National Park in Finland. There's Erigol Mountain in Ireland. There's Aldron and Ulfjärsfjell in Iceland, and Trolltunga in Norway. And all of these are iconic sites. They're all popular with locals and visitors. They're all quite different. So when we first came together in the project, we looked at how we could find common ground and common solutions to our individual problems. But during the course of the project, we realized that the solutions in fact had to be individual to allow 5 unique countries, legislations, natural traits, and this is a structure. But by working together across borders, we were able to find a common structure for the work that we carried out. And although we were different countries, the challenging were universal and familiar to sites, not just in our own countries, but all over the world. And by learning from each other, we were able to adapt and develop solutions that addressed our immediate issues, but also gave us a better insight into the best way forward in a longer term perspective strategy. So the 3 Ps became quite central. It was the planet, people, and planning. The great starting point was that we'd all had a sharp rise in visitor numbers, and the increased footfall caused erosion to sensitive landscapes. There was problem with littering and waste. Hiker safety was compromised, and unfortunate clashes with the local community occurred, ranging from issues with parking and littering in local communities, issues with land owners, wild tenting, and overcrowding in public areas. But at the same time, the visitors brought economic benefits to the area through new jobs, PR boost for a region, and a new lease of life to some areas suffering from job loss and declining population numbers. So the question became, how can we help protect the sensitive landscapes, but at the same time, keep the positive benefits from the visitors to the benefit to the local community? And while the initial thought in the project was to the impulse was to grab a shovel and get out on the hills and start improving the paths, which were in bad nick, we came to realize through the period just how important the planning process and those tools were. What we found was that regulation for natural sites usually has a focus on preserving, not intervening. So you're often only allowed to intervene once the problem's there, and once the damage is done, and when the ground is muddy and eroded, and when your visitor behavior is well and truly established and very hard to change. And we quickly realized that the best way to preserve nature actually is to intervene by building and maintaining good paths that encourage hikers to limit themselves to the path instead of roaming and trampling all over a wider area. Better information to change visitor behavior and measures to improve hiker safety ultimately meant that the landscape was protected and that the negative impact on the local community was minimized. There's a flaw also in the planning processes many places connected to visitor management. It often becomes the responsibility of the tourism organizations, but actually needs to be part of the public sector planning tools and regulations to be effective. If you're regulating a site like Erigol in Ireland or Toltunga in Norway, the tourists that arrive don't just impact that area, they impact the villages around as well with their arrival, and that needs to be taken into consideration. And then you move into social sustainability, which is another key, where a good place to live is a good place to visit, and bringing local stakeholders on board was very important. And it takes a lot of time, but it is crucial in continued successful management of a destination. And genuine local involvement in planning process are therefore very important, and an ongoing conundrum really in how to ensure that you can achieve that. So looking at what the NPA allowed us to do through the ASCENT project was that it brought structure to the chaos, really. Through the planning work that we've done, the surveys, we created GIS-based tools for mapping, working closely with the stakeholders to ensure that they were involved, and strategic path reviews were all part of toolkits that were assembled through the project that can be used for any other site that we're working with, both in our own areas and in others as well. So the transferable skills from the project were quite considerable. The cross-border skills transfer for practitioners and managers were very, very important in the project. We did this through living labs, and it was particularly great for our practitioners, the people who are actually there on the ground doing the work, were allowed to travel to each other's sites and learning from each other. And visiting the sites brought very valuable understanding of the challenges of the 5 partners and how those challenges were being met. We found that in spite of all the rain we experienced, this was a very, very positive experience for everyone. The photos there show teams from Northern Ireland and Norway working together to build a cross-drain here on the left, and how to use sheep's wool as a building material in paths over boggy ground on the right. Now, the latter one was a small thing in the project, but it really struck a chord in Norway, and I still get contacted from people wanting to know more about how to use that technique and maintain that skill. So the project also highlighted the need for continued focus over time. And so it allowed partners to extend the project through national funding after the project had ended in order to continue the work started. It also opened doors for national partnerships and networks. We've seen that particularly in Iceland and Norway, where our partner organizations now have a much better dialogue with and cooperation with other national bodies who are focusing on the same topics. To start with in the project, some of these were actually kind of a little bit on the opposite sides of the fence, and could see there was a clash, for instance, between the tourism organizations and the people wanting to preserve the landscape, but we're able to establish proper common ground and get on the same page. On the lighter note as well, which is an unexpected benefit, we found that meeting outside of the meeting rooms, like we did in this project, had a really big and unexpected benefit. When you're walking for hours together and working side by side in the rain with rocks and soil, you develop a close personal relationship with your team members. And I would say that real friendships formed between the partners. And this in turn helped the project live beyond the project period. We've continued to contact each other, both with regards to ASCENT related issues, but also for new ideas for projects or to advise on particular issues previously discussed. We all became each other's fan club, and we learned huge amounts from each other in this way. So looking back, I'm very proud now of what ASCENT achieved with the help of the NPA, and I'm happy to report that interest in the project continues still, and I'd invite you all to get in touch if you want to know more about the project results, and of course if you want to visit our lovely sites. Many thanks.
Thank you, Marta. I'm just admiring that beautiful scenery that you've got there. That's quite an inspiration, isn't it? Again, really good presentation there. Thank you so much for that. It does resonate very much with the chat that some of us had when just before we started the formal session there, that this was clearly an issue that you were investigating, but it's become even more acute now as a result of the pandemic and restrictions, and people in particular now seeking more safe, which tends to be the more sparsely populated areas, which tends to be a feature more so of our Northern Periphery and Arctic area. Again, I liked what you said about the juxtaposition of you had individual cases which needed individual solutions, but it was the shared learning that was really important, that facilitated that, and how you brought together. And I love what you said at the end there about how you all became each other's fan clubs. And from that short presentation, I can see why. Can I just check one thing, Marta? I missed when you said it at the start. What was the end date of the project, the official project?
It was September 2018, or 31st
right.
of August to be precise.
Right. So particularly encouraging then that after a fair length of time, there's still so much continuing interest and communications there. So thanks for that. Well, folks, again, I'm pleased to see we've got a few more people coming in there. And sorry you haven't heard all of these presentations, but Lucia did inform us at the start that the session has been recorded, so fear not, you'll be able to go back online and hear them after the full session today. These sessions have given us a huge amount of food for thought there. So we've got some time, not long, but maybe 25 minutes to the end of the session. So I'm going to start speaking a lot faster now. I'd like to get quite a number of questions and observations on what you've heard, thinking in particular of any messages for the next NPA programme and the next chapter of our Nordic and Arctic cooperation. I think everyone's aware of how to flag up that they have a question. If you're not, anyone who's just joined us, get into the chat room there and let Lucia know that you have something that you'd like to say. I'm going to kick off with Ian. You've got a question to get us started. And could I just say both to those asking questions and to our panelists, just to be keep what you're saying brief if you can, because I do want to get as many people in as possible. And when you're asking a question, if you could just let us know if it's for all of the panelists or just for one in particular. So thanks very much for your cooperation. Ian.
Linda, thank you very much, and thank you everyone who's spoken. My question is very simple, and it is to all of the panelists, because one of the long-term things that we're seeing, because the Western Development Commission here in Ireland, we're running a range of European-type programs because we've a generalised regional development remit under the Irish government here in the West. And the point is this, is that we've repurposed a lot of our European projects and other ones to deal with COVID. And one of the things that's coming out, Linda, is the peripherality factor and how it's exacerbated by this macroeconomic shock we're getting from the health shock with COVID. And briefly, just to show you what that means, we know that in the creative economy, there is a disproportionate impact on the creative economy nationally in Ireland. It's been measured at roughly 20+% in terms of GDP year-on-year decreases, whereas the national economy is 13%. But in the periphery, in our area, it's looking at over 30%. And here's my question. We have now seriously engaged in our current projects in trying to assess the current limitations and impact of COVID, but also the future. And I think for the greening of the NPP region, this is a huge and crucial issue. We probably need an assessment on how this is inducing a lag into people's aspirations and programs towards greening or making climate change really important economically and societally in our communities. And as I said, we've measured that in another subsector. My question really to the panelists is there any consideration of this in the programs you're doing, whether it be the tourism-based ones, whether it be the ocean pollution-based ones, the degree to which the new normal, as people are calling it really clunkily, how that may be an impact, and how in the future NPA program we could consider perhaps flagging it as a disproportionate marginalization for communities, or a challenge that adds height to the barrier they need to overcome. I'd like to hear thoughts on that, please, Linda.
Excellent question to get started off. Thanks for that, Ian. Neil, can I turn to you first?
Sure. There's always one troublemaker, isn't there, Ian? No, I think it's a really good point, and I think it's inevitable. I think it's something that we're going to have to tackle, and we're going to have to look at it. So it's not something that we've looked at in particular, but I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think it's the people that the areas that are challenged anyway by their inaccessibility to other potential opportunities. It's interconnectivity, but it's kind of a double whammy. So I think I'm not aware of anything that's ongoing now to actually kind of measure that or to counteract that. But I think you're right, and I think it's something that would be well worth investing in to examine much further. I'm an optimist at heart, so I always try to look for the opportunities, and I always try and think, what are the, can you turn it around? Is there any opportunities that could come out of it? And of course, it's a devastating thing that's happened, but what can we learn together? What are the kind of common shared experiences that you can use? What anything positive about that? And maybe it's the kind of people going to nature, looking at their environment, exercising in it more. Maybe we can kind of tap into that. Maybe we can do something positive out of this. That would be something well worth exploring.
Thank you, Neil. Marta, your thoughts?
Yes, that's going to be really hard to limit to a short comment, because this is a really, really interesting topic. I think in terms of tourism, obviously we've taken a massive hit, and the loss in value for so many people is huge, and they're on the brink as we speak. At the same time, we have here in Western Norway, our strategy says that our goal towards 2030 is to be sustainable, attractive through sustainability. Now this requires this change. Now we are suddenly having our own people as clients, and we see that there is a huge change required in order to provide products and logistics that actually are of interest to Norwegians. Norwegians are very demanding when they're holidaying. They want really high quality. You're looking for short destinations. You're looking for everything that has to be really, really top class and really sustainable. And we don't have the structures in place to develop particularly. We've done marketing for 100 years. And we're having to actually develop our tourism product and our visitor management so that we can take so we can handle the visitors in a way that isn't detrimental to environment or people who live there. And we don't have the structures, and the funding structures also aren't set up nationally to deal with that particular. That's the biggest challenge I think that we have, and we have a huge potential in actually making a positive change there.
Thank you for that, Marta. Nicholas, what would you like to say?
Thanks, Linda. If I understood the question from Ian correctly, it was essentially COVID has revealed the vulnerability of the already vulnerable areas, perhaps even more than other areas, and what can we do to address that? So I would say that we need to build up the way we address that from the sort of foundations of the economy. And as I mentioned, I think COVID has illustrated our dependency on things which are so often totally out with our own control. So we have to think about those things which underpin our economies, but which we need to have much greater control on. And those things, the foundational aspects of those things are food, water, energy, transport, social services, education, stuff like that, which are the precepts on which we can build our quality of life. So I actually think that none of those things are actually distracting from these huge questions of climate change and COVID-related health issues and the global risks that we face. They all have to be addressed in the same way. And in fact, if you address one, you almost always will be addressing another. So I think the real challenge that we've got is to illustrate how we do that in practice, and constantly stress the significance of addressing these things in tandem, not just as isolated issues on their own.
Thank you. Key point there too, isn't it? And something that again has been at the foundation of what we've done in NPA for quite a number of years. We have another question coming in from Nikki Maguire. Nikki, would you like to ask your question?
Hello. Yes, as I say in the chat, this is slightly off topic, but this is something that I guess has come up in my previous experience of a project and our new one as well, and it struck me when we talked about the Greenland, or heard about the Greenland example of, even translating the logo and things like that, how as solely English speakers and projects predominantly ran by English speakers, how can we better speak the language of the other communities in our project and not have it as an add-on that we translate something once it's done? How do we better help our other partners in that as well? It'd be great to hear some ideas and how we could do that. We're starting a project, we're in our first period, just so we can put these things into place.
Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, a wee bit of a different topic, but I think it's very, very relevant, and it does get to the heart of how we work together there. I don't know if any of the others joining this session are members of the University of the Arctic, but we have been for about 20 years. And it's a massive topic for debate there, and trying to get the balance in that one is just so important. So interested to hear what our panelists have to say on it. Marta, can you kick off for us? Hello, Marta.
I'm trying to find the unmute button there. Yes, I think, and I might be coming at this from a slightly different angle, not being an English speaker, but we had a conversation actually at some point in the project, and also in other, when we are applying for funding to any kind of international project or even a research project as well, there's a requirement for a particular wording that one likes to see in applications. And what can happen actually when you're sitting there as a project partner and looking at the application that you've submitted, and then come to sit there and actually try to transfer that into action, it can be a bit unclear what you actually mean. The language becomes needlessly complicated, and I'm sure it makes perfect sense for anyone who's had an academic upbringing in an English-speaking country. But for those who don't, you end up wasting quite a bit of time by sitting there wondering a little bit of what precisely are we meant to do here? What exactly is it that we're wanting to achieve? It's a slightly curveball, I guess, but I think keeping things slightly simpler might actually be a rather simple solution to some of that. We did also, in ASCENT, translate logos and things, and I know it meant something to the Finnish partners that documentation, for instance, was produced in Finnish, and I think it's important, particularly when you have areas of the country which aren't exposed to an international environment the whole time.
Thank you. Nicholas.
Well, I think it's a very interesting question, and it goes straight to the heart of how you achieve things within a specific area, which may have a specific language. And I don't think there's an easy answer faced with the tyranny of the English language. But perhaps the MPA ought to have some sort of normative principle where partners are always obliged or required to translate the meaning of the projects and the activities of the projects into their local languages as a precondition of being involved in the MPA. Because I do feel, and I think underpins the question, that if you can't communicate what you're saying within your country or within the local area, where there could be, like Gaelic, a specific language or even a dialect, then it's not fulfilling its purpose.
That's a strong statement, yes, and I would agree with that. Neil.
So just an example of how we've used it in the past, in particular Circular Ocean, we tried to translate things according to the languages which were present in our project. So we used our partners there quite heavily. We were lucky enough to have a Danish Greenlandic partner, but even in their institution, I think they only had one person in their institution which translated things into Greenlandic, and it's very time consuming. You have to really understand what the meaning of it was. You couldn't translate it, literally word for word. So we were lucky in the sense that we could translate things into Greenlandic, but that's just because we had people involved in the project itself. But again, there were, I know in other projects, and I think that's project as well, if you have a country in the NPA region which isn't present in your project, do you make efforts to try and translate it into that language? That was a discussion that we had, and I think in the past we haven't done that. So if for instance, if we don't have a Swedish partner, I don't think we have translated into Swedish, but maybe we should. I'm certainly not against that. I think it's just a more kind of practical issues which held it up rather than any moral issues.
Absolutely. And one thing about NPA activities, just because it's difficult to do doesn't mean to say we don't do it and we don't make recommendations to do it. So good points there. I'm just looking at Lucia and the chat. No more questions at the moment. Ian's come in with a very good point there. Given the scale of climate change and the potential diminishing of focus on this currently, is there a case for a university programme alliance on climate change rather than simply Arctic? Climate change north, for example, the collective approach would be stronger for EU interactions. Anyone got any thoughts on that?
The one thought, which is something you've mentioned, Linda, which is the University of the Arctic. It does have non-Arctic members as well. So that could be a kind of conduit therein for looking into this kind of climate change issues. But I'm sure climate change is, you know, one of the #1 threats. So it's something I think everyone everywhere would be happily involved in, and I don't think there would be any resistance to something like climate change north or anything like that. We were part of Coast Adapt, which was looking at how communities could implement practical solutions to climate change. So it's something I know the NPA have supported in the past. And I don't know if Ian's thinking about something, projects or something wider, or a program or something, or I'm not sure what.
May I come in, Linda?
Please do. We've got a few minutes to finish off.
Just to briefly say on that, I mean, this is a thought. This is the format for it, and listening to some of the previous discussions. We all have disparate jurisdiction, disparate approaches to a common problem. And when you mentioned the University of the Arctic, the limitation on that culturally for a lot of fringe peripheral countries like ourselves is the Arctic seems far away, and it simply isn't. So it is, in a sense, an approach to make people understand. But I think rather than jumping to the University Alliance, which is somewhat controversial and confrontational perhaps, maybe the NPA should consider the commonality of shared learning in a more formal structure around a climate change north task group or something, where common things like our ocean plastic pollution, the tourism challenges in peripheral areas can all come together in common purpose themes that somehow can be spread out, because we've national, I was listening to one person there talking about how the sustainability is the national funding after the European funding. Well, that's a stronger voice when we have it in a more coordinated way. And I don't know what the end game there is, but it seems to me we're all solving the same problem from different approaches, which is helpful in some ways, and certainly funding wise, it's great. But I don't know if it's the most efficient way at the current time. At the moment, we can't get traction even with a green government on the tiller of control in our parliament. We can't get major traction on carbon and climate change issues. It's just swamped in the noise of COVID at the moment, and approaches to that need to be considered.
We have just a few minutes left. Is there anyone apart from the panelists who wants to come in with a last very quick point or observation? Then I'm just going to ask the three panelists for literally 2 sentences to finish off. Last chance, hand up, going, gone. Right, Neil, your last quick sum up. I know I'm asking a lot.
Well, I think there's been a lot of good input there, and I think I think we're all on the same page. I think that's the common thing that I'm kind of seeing, is that there hasn't been any huge disagreements. No one said we should be doing this, and someone has said, no, we shouldn't be doing that. So I see a lot of agreement around, and I'm kind of positive that a lot of whatever happens in the next program, if there is a next program, there'll be lots of opportunities for some really good projects. But I see a lot of scope for more sustainable projects and positive outcomes.
Thank you. Nicholas, your last words.
Yes, well, I think that's been very interesting. And I would just urge everyone to both hold on to the international context that are so fantastically illustrated through the NPA, but also emphasize, explore, and celebrate the synergies between these essential topics, and don't let anyone distract us from presenting them in that way.
Thank you. Good inspirational words there. Over to you, Marta.
Thank you. I think I want to close on the reflection on what Ian said there about the climate change and the focus on that and whether it drowns in the COVID. I think in many respects, actually, COVID has presented us with an opportunity on that score, where a lot of things have ground to a halt. And even though governments around the planet are swamped by trying to combat the most immediate effects on that, this is an opportunity now to get back not to what it was, but to find a new system that works better and to put us on the right path on where we aim to be ultimately in a more sustainable path. And I think that is something I feel that people are aware of. That longer term perspective has to be not back to the same old, but forward in a better direction.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, good inspirational words to finish. I'm not even going to attempt to sum up all of that. I don't think we've got Stefan yet, have we, Lucia?
No, he didn't make it.
I'll try and do a quick summary of the key points, which is going to be difficult because I think we had a really, really good discussion there. For the plenary session, hopefully you'll all be there. And if I make some howling mistakes with it, please don't hesitate to let me know. I'm happy to pick up on that. So let me just finish off by saying real sincere thanks to Nicholas, Neil and Marta for the presentations and getting some of the discussion going. I just wish we'd another hour or two to carry on with this. And thanks to all of you taking part for your valuable insights, and I hope you found the session quite useful, and particularly huge thanks to Lucia for keeping us all on track. I know it was a bit of a task there at times, but so far so good. Well done on that. I have enjoyed. I want, just before I finish off, to emphasise a point that Nicholas made, which is particularly pertinent for those of us joining from UK institutions. Yes, we do have huge issues with continued participation in the Northern Periphery and Arctic programme due to Brexit, but there is a massive commitment from Scottish partners and Scottish agencies to find a way of participating. So we do hope very sincerely that we'll be able to carry on the work that we've been doing with you over such a long time and have conversations like this again in the future. Now, instructions for what happens next, we're just exactly on time here. At the end, you have to just stay in this session and you will be redirected immediately to the final plenary session. So you don't have to actually do anything now. Is that right, Lucia?
Yes, those are the last instructions.
Great. Oh well, just wait for, we're about to burst into the big plenary session now. If not, I'll have to look out these holiday snaps and tell you about where we went on our holidays last year. Oh, it was brilliant. Distant memory now, but good at the time.
As much as I'd love to hear that, Linda, I'll have to go, I'm afraid. Anyway, lovely to see you.
And you, thanks so much for that, Nicholas. Keep in touch.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Bye. Here's Michaela calling us back.
Hi, we are wrapping up and we're closing a meeting in the plenary. What is your status of that? You ready?
Yes, that's us just finished, so ready to come back.